Oh, hello, hello. Welcome to the Terrainacolypse. This is Rob of Pineapple Creations.
And over here, I am Andy. I
And he's
suppose also Pineapple Creations, kind of. I don't know.
and
Work that
we're
out.
here to show you how to make some cool terrain out of household materials, some foam, really whatever you can get your hands on. So first things first, this is probably the last time you're gonna see my face because the rest of the stream will have this lovely view of our working surface. But first, let's do this cool little video, which really goes over the basics of terrain making. So I hope you enjoy it. Let me just make the screen full. I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, here we go. Hello, everyone. This is Rob from Pineapple Creations, and welcome to our YouTube channel. I'm going to go over the basics of tools of the trade, to help you make some terrain. First things first, hot things are hot, sharp things are sharp. Always be mindful of this when you are working with your materials. You always want to be safe. On top of that, make sure your environment's clean as you build, because things can get messy, but you do that on your own accord. So we're going to start going over a couple things. First, we're going to start with some things that cut. So the first thing we have here is the hobby knife, or X-Acto blade, depending on what you're used to. They're great tools for cutting very specific lines, grooves, and multiple materials. Another great tool to use is your box cutter. Box cutters are spectacular in cutting those hard to cut things. And you notice my blade has intentional spots where it's supposed to break off. Be mindful of this when you buy your hobby knife. Be safe with what you use. You'll never really need to keep the blade completely extended. So I would suggest using your hobby knife at about the length of your thumb, maybe an inch, if that. It's a very useful tool. Next up, we're going to talk about some clippers. You can see I have two different types. These thick ones are really good for cutting wooden dowels, thicker chunks of metal, depending on what materials you're working with. And the smaller ones are more precise, really great for cutting things off of sprues if you want to add sprue from your plastic terrain kits onto your terrain, or more specific cutting. After that, we have our hobby saw, which is really good for cutting large things evenly. It's great for PVC pipe, popsicle sticks to look like floorboards. Really, you'll find a lot of use out of it. The next two tools are hot glue guns. Now you can see in the video that there's two different types of glue guns. One is your pretty standard go-to hobby shop gun, but as you can see in the next part, this glue gun here is a bit more advanced. It has two settings for heat, at a more precise point, which is really great for your more specific gluing jobs. And the great thing about hot glue is it's not just for gluing two things together. You could make lava effects, you could make slime effects, you can make some industrial ooze. It's really versatile. The next two tools I'm going to mention are a bit pricey. I mean, they're like $30 and up, but they're very useful in your terrain making arsenal. The first one is from a company called Woodland Scenics, and it is a hot wire foam cutter. It's a really great tool for carving XPS foam into organic shapes. So you just slide your finger up, put your foam in between the wires, and just cut shapes. And as you can see, it's like a hot knife through butter. It's very simple, it's very effective. You have a lot of potential for making a lot of interesting things with this. I would highly recommend it. I love it. Up next is a Dremel. A Dremel is great for grinding, filing, sanding, really so many tools, so many uses are in your Dremel. I don't know where it'd be in terrain making or in this hobby without it. I really love it. It's a great tool. Up next, we're going to talk about some glues. I like using Eileen's Tacky Glue, which is a white PVA glue like Elmer's glue, except it's stronger. It cures better, and it's great for basing, it's great for flocking, it's great for pretty much a good go-to. It's great for gluing XPS foam to itself. Up next we have Loctite Gel Control Glue. It's a super glue, it's a strong super glue, and I like it with the gel control because when you're gluing plastic to itself, it gives you a minute to pose the model or pose the piece before it cures. But the strongest glue I have is E6000. It's great for when you want to glue anything to anything and you don't want it to separate. After 24 hours, it's a strong bond. It's really useful for gluing things to bases. It does melt XPS foam, so just keep that in mind. Speaking of XPS foam, it is a great material to build with. It's cheap, it's effective, you could whittle at it, you could work with it with so many different tools. A piece of it, a 2 foot by 2 foot piece of it, goes for about less than $10 in the States, and you will get so much utilization out of this material. I highly recommend getting it where you can. A 4 foot by 6 foot sheet of it goes for about $20, maybe a little less depending on where you are. But what we're going to show you in this video is a very simple way to make rocks. So the cool thing about this foam is you could kind of just rip it apart with your hands and have already a kind of natural looking rock, but it still looks like a chunk of foam. So the next step is to just whittle away at the foam. It's that simple. Take any sharp edges and just bevel them to make them a bit more organic. Another approach is to just put your knife in the foam and just pop it out. And the more variation you do, the more natural the rocks will look, or your future boulders. Another way to make it look more natural in regards to rocks is to take a ball of tin foil, crumple it up, and just roll it over the foam. It's a simple little thing that adds a lot more variance and it makes your rock look like a rock instead of just a chunk of foam. It's quick, it's simple, and it's effective. So once you're done building, well, as you start building, you might want to consider putting everything on a base. A great base to use is MDF board. It's strong, it's durable, it's gonna last. But as you can see, the base of it might not blend nicely into your table. So if you want, you could use your box cutter or any sharp thing to cut the corners at like a 45-degree angle so it blends more naturally into the table. Once you have everything built and the way you want it to be on your base, it's a great idea to have a miniature for scale. This way you can see how your terrain impacts your table, impacts your game. I hope you enjoyed this quick little tutorial, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow us on Pineapple Creator on Instagram, and happy wargaming. Cool. Alrighty. So that's... Oop. Okay.
Yeah, we're back.
Oh, she's made of cotton. Well, the glue is definitely, it could be used with cotton. It'll give you some very interesting effects. It'd look pretty cool, actually. And what do you think?
Yeah, you can use basically any material with. I assume we're talking about hot glue, not the tacky glue.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, the hot glue works with many materials. The one thing to consider is if you are working with metal at any point, it will get, well, of course, very hot. So it's not going to burn anything, but it may get a little hot on you as it
Yes,
does.
definitely something to consider. Whatever you're gluing hot glue with can potentially get hot, especially metal, thin plastics. If it was a small ball of cotton, be wary of where your fingers are in regards to gluing hot glue to the cotton. because there's a high chance you might burn yourself. It is hot.
But it is not dangerous with cotton.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
kind of be great.
So,
So
Rob, what are you working on over there?
I'm building a cave. So in the video, I mentioned that MDF board is great basing, and that's true if you have access to it. I have a bunch of CDs from, honestly, I don't even know when. So I've just been using these as bases, or I'm using this today as a base for this little cave that I'm slowly putting together. And it might look like a bunch of chunks of foam, but as I whittle away at it and start gluing things together, you'll see it'll look pretty cool. How about you, Andy? What are you working on?
I am working on trees over here. This guy is a little birch pine. I don't know anything about trees, but it's a tree looking guy. Got a nice bottom heavy sort of base here. And while the video is playing, I whipped this guy together really fast.
Nice.
The process is very quick. If we're talking about bases, I use bottle caps for these guys because they're round, they're abundant, and they're actually, because they're metal, decently heavy to keep the rest of the piece bottom heavy enough. But
Yeah,
only I could get it to
like a
stand.
level surface. So
Yeah.
that's great. I think it's the cool thing about terrain making that I love so much about this hobby is that like really anything can be used as building materials. Like so right now I had these chunks of insulation from actually a project I did a while back to try to build like a cat hut because we have a little feral cat that we helped keep warm through the winter, and I have this box of offcuts that they will. I kept them because I know I would find a use for them, and now here we are making this cool little cave.
Yep.
And
The main thing to keep in mind when working on terrain is that we are upcycling and not hoarders, right?
there's a thin line. I call it avid terrain enthusiasm, not hoarding, not trash collecting. Opportunists. Yes, we're opportunists. I'm gonna go with that one.
Yeah. We're definitely not like bad guy alley cats that you see in a lot of Disney movies.
With the snapping fingers and like
Oh, of
we have
course.
a choreography.
Yeah, yeah.
If only. Yeah, but we're so everything and anything can be used as terrain. So those of you who have seen a lot of cool stuff online, like I know there's a lot of D&D players out there. They see what's that really great company, Dungeon Forge, or was it? Uh,
I believe that's one of them.
yeah, Hero Forge, something for Hero Forge makes the minis. Whatever. There's like those really high end like resin cast dungeon tiles. Dwarven Force, thank you. By the way, we have Richard here as our amazing AV assist, and we appreciate his help. Thank you so
I
much. Voice in the
yeah,
head.
I believe he's
Oh,
an invisible voice in our heads.
am I? So nobody else hears him? Great, splendid. Either way, thank you for the help. And yeah, those tiles are great. But if you don't have $60 to drop on 5 tiles, some foam, some bottle caps, you'd be surprised what you could make into a dungeon encounter if you just look around and think a little bit unconventionally. I mean, look at Andy's trees. What are they made out of again?
Yeah, so these trees actually begin their lives as paper straws that I get angry at the fast food joints.
There we
So
go.
instead of using these fellas to drink my drinks and get all pulpy instead of working after 5 minutes, I have decided to start turning them into these trees with the help of some paint, some glue, and some Brillo pads. It's
Can't go
actually
wrong with that.
pretty simple. What do you got over there, Rob?
Oh, so I'm just whittling away at the top of my little cave here. So the idea is I've just been really into spiders as of late for like just in general. Like I do a lot of miniature painting and wargaming and stuff. So I was thinking of making multiple caves like this, adding some ruined effects. I have like a bag of like resin pieces that I've cast my own or found in various, I don't know, years of hobbying. I'm gonna glue it around here and make like a jungle cave. And then I'm gonna use like Halloween cotton balls as like the bags of cotton they give you for Halloween as the webs once I actually paint this and put it together. So it's coming along. I'm excited. And I'm just improvising really. Another thing to
Yeah.
really consider in terrain making is that like you could always have a plan laid out, draw up your piece of terrain and have this plan of approach, but half the fun is really just improvising. Like I didn't draw up this concept of a cave. I didn't think I'd be using a CD base as the base of this, but I was digging through my pile of not trash, hoarded goods in potential terrain, and I just, I started putting things together. And it's so far it's coming along pretty good. I'm excited to see how it's going to end up because honestly, I don't know how it's going to end up.
Yeah. For these trees, actually, I drew basically all of my inspiration from a video made by, if you're familiar with them, Black Magic Craft on YouTube. Jeremy up in Canada has a video where he made very similar trees out of wooden dowels and the same Brillo pads. But in the interest of reusing my own personal garbage, which I think is really the spirit of this hobby,
Yes.
uh, I decided that perhaps maybe paper straws would be enough. And without plans, again, just kind of get in there, start building things.
Yeah. You can't go wrong with some trash and a whole lot of imagination.
Yeah.
Which is 90% of terrain making, which brings up a casual segue. So on my Instagram at Pineapple, what is my Instagram? Pineapple Creator is my name on Instagram, right? I should know these things.
It
Um,
sounds important. Yeah.
I started this thing called the Trash Bash, where it's literally just build whatever you can out of found materials. Like plastic containers all of a sudden look a lot like industrial silos, or that weird bottle cap could be a nice base for something, I don't know, fantasy. So what I've been working on for a good chunk of the month is I built this generic sci-fi looking capacitor generator insert sci-fi prop here out of literal trash. It's old pill bottles, insure containers, a bottle cap or four, and it's great because once you paint it up and put some cool little stickers on it, it looks appropriately grimdark if you play 40K, or super science fiction if you play like games like Infinity, or maybe super dystopian if you play games like this game called Dark Age. And it's just trash. This literally cost me nothing. And this is some ancient uh, HP printer update CD. I don't think they use CDs anymore to update. So, hey, this would have been in a landfill somewhere anyway. So now I get to use it for my war games. And another thing I've been working on is this cool little sci-fi robot. Trying to see where the camera is, and it's mostly trash. Like the body's a Brita filter. The cool little bits and bobs are from various like asthma medication parts that I've just taken and like literally just glued everything to itself. These arms are from some old Matrix toy. This is from some old toy, a 40K bit. You could get really creative with literal trash, and that's what I love about this hobby. It really is exciting, strangely liberating, because you could, instead of throwing it away, you're like, yeah, it's a generator now.
Yeah. It's like a tabletop scrapyard project.
And it's awesome. So, because it starts with terrain making and trash gathering, and if you're down the rabbit hole like me and Andy, you start dabbling in other things like resin casting. I didn't get a 3D printer yet, but this hobby helped me learn how to resin cast, which is where this giant bag of resin stuff came from, actually. So a lot of these are just cast chunks of I had some like aquarium terrain that I bought from some pet store, and I may or may not have hit it with a hammer. And whatever bits that were cool, I just kept, made a molds, and now I have, these really cool ruined faces and these columns that are, ooh, if it focuses. Yeah, it's just chunks of resin. So anything can be upcycled, anything can be reused.
Yeah. And speaking of rabbit holes, maybe we should just give a quick little bit about how we got into all of this hoarding, creative
Avid
hoarding.
trash collecting, avid opportunistic hoarding. I don't, I
Yeah.
don't, I don't think we're hoarders. We're enthusiasts.
Well, where did you get your start with your avid trash collecting enthusiasm?
Oh boy, that's actually a really good question. It, it was I was in high school, a casual 100 years ago, in like 2007, and my friend Nick was like, "Hey, I have this cool rule book for this game called Warhammer 40K," and I was like, "What's that?" And then my life was just permanently damaged by this. So he got me to play 40K. He had a Chaos Space Marine army. I started collecting Tyranids. And I was like, this is awesome. I love this because this is real life StarCraft because I was however old, in 2007, like 17, and everything was StarCraft in my eyes. I love playing science fiction games. So I started collecting the models. Then I was thinking, man, people play on really cool looking tables. I want to start building that. So here we are 14 years later, still building that. like um, carving foam is still like my basic skill set, but I'm gonna start dabbling in 3D printing one day, and that's how deep this rabbit hole goes. I have an airbrush. I have an entire basement dedicated to this, and I've made actually a lot of friends along the way. That's how I met Andy. Like
Yeah, actually,
the
we
yeah.
met at one of these workshops. Actually, you were running one of these out east, and I showed up. I was one of like the four people there. We started making terrain, and that's actually where I got started with all the terrain building. I'd already been a nerd for a while, looking into Dungeons and Dragons, war games, all that. But yeah, after just the first class, I've started just making things out of carving foam and finding garbage and looking for inspiration in other people's dumpsters secretly.
Or
And
not so secretly in my case.
yeah, and basically there's no way out. Escape while you can.
We're in this for the long haul. So you may see this as an informative workshop, but secretly we just see this as we're gonna have more people to drag down with us. But at least we're having fun with it.
Yeah, and it's something of a cry for help.
Yeah, didn't mind. Just
Yeah,
help SOS, please.
yeah. So with all that, I suppose we could get started talking about maybe just like the process. I have the various life stages of these trees set up in front of me here. So I'm
Cool.
just going to go over that for a minute. Uh, these trees are, again, very basic looking, very kind of whatevery, but they can be made to look diverse enough to make a very unique looking forest. And it really comes from very, very basic materials. Whoop, as they all roll around. So
Let's see you.
it all starts with this. This is a paper straw, I think, from Taco Bell. You don't have to go buy a pack of these, by the way. Whenever you're out, I suppose you shouldn't be out nowadays, but whenever you are out, you go to a drive through, you get a drink, you get that paper straw that always just turns into just cud in your mouth. Instead of chewing on that, you could leave it out of the drink, take it home, decide, I'm going to turn this into another mess for my tabletop. So where I start is I leave the straw in its paper wrapper, just like this. I'm going to get all this stuff out of the way. And I just cut it down to size. I'll rip off one end of the wrapper just to get a better grip on it. I'll take my X-Acto knife and just slice a bit off. The reason why I'm leaving the wrapper on is because we're going to glue it on later, and I want to keep about the same length of the straw itself. So chop into that guy, get to the end there, and then I take this, like, it's like a wing. Just cut that right off. Very careful with my fingers.
Yeah,
Not to
remember,
slice
safety
at
is
anything.
always important in this hobby. You want to
That's
keep all your
correct.
fingers and all your toes.
Or as many as you
Ideally.
can.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to
Less
keep
your
as many
better.
fingers and toes as I can get away with. All right. And now with the paper still on the straw, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of my Mod Podge here, and I've got water in this cup that I use for just various paint, but it isn't necessarily just for your paintbrush. I'm going to mix the Mod Podge just a little bit on the palette, like that, with a bunch of this water. It's a good thing I got all these straws around. Otherwise, it'd be hard to move liquids.
All the straws.
That's right. Get that open. I'm going to take a bunch of this water, mix that onto the Mod Podge. It's a bit of a mess. The whole thing's a mess. And I'm going to mix that around with my fingers. This is the sort of thing that you have to be very willing to get dirty with. You're going to end up elbow deep in paint and glue and foam bits, and there's going to be a lot of cleanup when we're done, no matter what we do. So I figure, why wear gloves?
This is
So
true.
what I do is I take this glue and water mixture, and I just soak the paper on the outside that it was wrapped in with that. And that's going to bond it to the straw. But also, when I wrinkle the paper before it dries, it's going to come out with something of a bark texture that we're going to dry brush on later on.
Right. It's very
All right.
satisfying to watch. Very Bob Ross esque.
That's right. Just a happy, happy little mistake. Just
Happy little Mod Podge.
we are making happy little trees. Look at that.
Yeah, there we go. Full
Yeah.
circle.
So I put a little twist into that paper. I don't know how big it is for you guys over there, but I put a little twist into that, as bark often does. Maybe twist it back a little bit, and you end up with just a very whatever looking tube. Now you have to let this dry for a little while. So I washing the glue off my fingers. I have this other straw set aside already. And this one is already done. Take it right out the oven. This is what it looks like. Isn't that a wonderful looking turkey dinner? So,
wow.
yeah. So this has the glue on it, and I have covered it in a coat of white paint. It needs another, so I'll just do that right now.
Cool.
And I'm going to take, I have my palette here. I've got a nice glob of white paint. This is white craft paint. I think it's, what is it? Apple Barrel. No, this is folk art. People ask a lot, what is the right brand of craft paint for this, that, or the other thing? I'm of the opinion that there is no correct opinion on that. They're all basically the same for our purposes.
My opinion is the cheapest in regards to acrylic paints, because unlike our miniatures that use this very expensive high pigment paint, you're just, enough thin coats of something big. You're not going to need like very fancy paint. Your cheapo acrylic, black, white, whatever colors will be more than enough for this.
Yeah, and what you don't want to use, actually, what would be a bad option are those expensive paints.
Yeah.
You don't want to use your nice Citadel paints. You don't want to use your Scale 75 paints. And the big reason for that is they cost a whole lot of money. You're going to use a whole bottle very quickly, and you're not going to see much better detail out of it.
Yep.
Because for everything that you build, there is going to be all the details are going to be so huge that the fine grains of the pigment aren't going to change anything.
Exactly. It's not necessary.
So also don't be afraid to mix the brands for the acrylic paints. I haven't found any problems with that. I have a Apple Barrel Black. I've also got, turns out Testers makes acrylics. I did not
Really?
know. Yeah, I got these at the hardware store. These are
Oh,
very
whoa.
accessible. This is just a typical green matte paint. I'll probably use this. I'll water it down to wash to make maybe a moss effect later. But right now, I'm going to show you guys how to paint the birch effect onto the trees.
Give me that birch.
Notice how fast we've gotten to this point. I know I pre-made this turkey and I just pulled it out of the oven. It takes a couple minutes to dry. I'd say I'll probably guess like 15 minutes before the glue dries.
A lot of this hobby is also waiting for things to dry.
Yeah.
Like, as you can see, I'm working on this hill, and the top of it, I just kind of glued on the PVA glue. Down the road, it will be a stronger bond, but right now it's a little slippery. So I'm just kind of doing some minor details as I wait for this to dry.
Yeah.
So a great thing to have in mind is to have multiple projects going at the same time, which, if you are in this hobby long enough, will just be your new normal. You're going to have minimum like maybe 8 projects at a time, forget about them, visit them a year later, but always have something lined up. It keeps you busy.
That is especially true when you're working with white glue, like Mod Podge or Elmer's glue or the tacky glues. They take, sometimes it feels like an eternity to dry, especially if they're two solid pieces like smushed onto each other. So moving on with the trees, I have all these little bits of Brillo pad that I cut out. I didn't cut them out for painting, though I will be using them. They're actually cut out because they're used for the leaves on the trees later. And if you just take just a corner, a little snip off of the Brillo pad, you can cut them with regular scissors, by the way. This is not a difficult thing to cut. I was worried about like, oh, what about the blade of my knife? What about the scissors that I use? Are they going to be ruined? It actually comes out fine. But you take the edge of one of the Brillo pad snips, wipe off most of it, just like that. And then you just kind of poke onto the straw, just little bits, just like that, kind of like cow spots. Maybe wipe some off, smudge it around. A lot of birch trees have, they have that white bark, but they also have that very black underside. And that's kind of what we're going for here. So I'll wipe that one down. You see here, I made a much too big blotch, but that mistake is going to turn into tree details later. We'll see.
There's no mistakes in this hobby, just improvising.
That's right, just improvising.
You'd be surprised what a quote-unquote accident turns into late game. It'll come out really great.
It's all about that late game. So I'm just poking all these textures all over my tree here, making a little birch. I recognize might be moving a little fast for people to follow along, but I think the process is very simple enough.
So you're using a stippling approach, right, with
Yeah,
the brush?
I am stippling with some Brillo pad excess that I cut before. And it's really
So
hard to show the camera what I'm doing while I'm doing it because the
it
camera is opposite to me.
it's very tricky to do this with a camera. It's the first time I'm doing this too.
Yeah, but
So as you stipple, if you look at my camera, I've been trying to make my chunks of foam look a bit more organic. And by doing that, like I stated in the video, you just take chunks of it and whittle. 80% of working with XPS foam is just whittling. Um, every little slab makes it look a bit more natural. Every little chip gives it more personality. And if you look closely, I put all these little resin faces in different places. That rhymed. Just for that deeper ruin effect. And I like putting things around the entire piece of terrain because your models will always be engaging with it on every aspect of the table, like a full 360. So if you just make one side really pretty, I think it does the terrain injustice. So I'm hiding these little faces around here. And what I like about making terrain is like as I build it, I could build like a background story to it. So in this case, it could have been some ancient ruin from some lost civilization, and the faces could have been like ancient gods or something like that. And in that, like that gives me an idea for a D&D campaign that I could put together. If I play like Age of Sigmar, which is a big fantasy war game, that gives me like an extra depth of immersion. So that's always another thing to consider when you're making your terrain. Like Andy's Birch Forest could be completely the basis of an entire encounter of some low resolution polygon lich or something like that. Like the
oh yeah,
possibilities are limitless, and it's great. It's a
you
great
can always
way to
use
tell a story.
trees, and I've found that even though they are pretty low resolution, it's their presence of being there at all is actually such a boon to how the game looks that nobody complains that the individual branch isn't made of what is it called, like sea spray or something, that fancy like twig that people like to use over in Europe when they're making their trees, because people use natural materials for these things and I think those people are insane.
That's so that actually brings up a great point, Andy. There's different levels to every hobby. Like in regards to terrain making, I like to believe that we are strong in the rabbit hole, but the final frontier is like the train people. Those people that are like do like the model trains that make a like 1/8 scale of a small village in Eastern Germany where they pluck every individual root from somebody's backyard to make their like rivers. And that's great and more power to them. But that amount of detail is
It's absolute insanity.
the final frontier. Like
That's right.
I don't even like they make static grass applicators out there for like $100 that like make grass stand vertically. Actually, that brings up a good point. Hold on one second. So usually when you base a model, you buy something called flock. In this case, this what I have in front of you is a giant bag, a giant container of just green grass looking stuff. You put down some PVA glue like Aleene's Tacky glue or whatever, sprinkle it on, and that's your base. A static grass applicator makes it so that when you shake down like longer flocking, like longer blades of grass, they all stand vertically. And that is the final frontier. That's like those train guys. That is that is detail. That is phenomenal detail. It looks gorgeous, but it's pretty hard to play a war game on that type of terrain. So
That's also an excellent point. Because the people who make miniatures for train sets are so deep into the hobby, they really know like what tricks work and what tricks don't. So
yeah.
when they show you, oh, you could do this for like a quick trick, they actually really have such a firm grasp on what it is that we're trying to so poorly imitate. Uh,
Yeah.
that like when they tell you use this water effect, not that water effect, you could almost take that as gospel as compared to
Yeah.
perhaps what just looking up like water effect and then buying whatever bottle comes up.
And that is it all goes back to like there are different levels to enjoy every hobby. And those train guys, those train people are very like again, they're so deep in. They've been doing this for decades, some of them. I love watching those videos. And when there's this one video, I don't remember, it's like an hour long, and it's just this guy casually standing in his basement. He's like, "Hey friends, I'm gonna teach you how to make a river." And he goes, hops a little fence, and he's standing in his diorama, which is easily like 12 feet by like 8 feet. Like just a chunk of his basement is a small village somewhere. And I love watching those videos. It's really calming. But will I ever make something that big for my 40K dioramas? Probably not.
I'd hope not. No.
But
Yeah. That's the
I
sort of thing I try to avoid.
that's the deep end.
I already have a basement full of miniatures. If I build a home for those miniatures that are like to scale, I think I might lose my mind.
Oh yes. I mean, I have a mount. I'm literally drowning in models, so
Yeah. So
it's crisis.
I'm going to this tree trunk is painted. You can see it looks kind of like a cow, or like y'all remember Gateway. I remember Gateway.
The computer?
Yeah, remember it's got like the
Whoa.
cow brick.
Oh, you're bringing it back.
Yeah. So this is just a white straw stippled with black. It's really nothing fancy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hot glue here. I'm going to put a big old blob in the inside of my bottle cap. You can use whatever is your favorite soda, and just stick the straw right in there and leave it until it stands, and then leave it alone. Once that initial dollop of hot glue is dry and cool, which is very soon, I'm going to fill the whole thing up with even more hot glue just to take up the space.
So, talking about hot glue and its many uses,
Mm-hmm.
hot glue has a million uses. It is spectacular to work with, minus the whole potential second degree burns. But you can use it to fill gaps. You could use it for anchoring things. You could use it for goopy effects, which is, I like using the word goopy. Like if you keep like making it like drip over something, it'll look like it's covered in either like a magma or like some type of like industrial goo.
Yeah.
And after that, you just paint it up, make it glossy, and there we go. And that is literally just a stick of glue. It's has many uses. If
There's
you take,
essentially an entire YouTube channel based around that too. What's that? Scotty DM, I think.
oh yeah,
Yeah, he makes everything out of hot glue. He's some kind of a wizard, I tell you.
a wizard. Can't go
DM
wrong with
Scotty.
that. Cool.
Just
So
filling this guy up.
going back to my little hill here, you notice there's like big gaps in different places. A couple here. I don't know what I'm doing with the top of this yet, but at this point, I want to take a mini out just for sake of scale. I have my little Tau Fire Warrior from 40K, and if I wanted to leave it the way it is, this now gives the way this hill is designed gives me some, use, some practicality out of this range. So I could have a squad of guys hiding in this hill as something attacks them or gives a nice cover bonus for potentially like a 5-person squad, which is great for 40K. I think I haven't played in a while, but it's really beneficial for this game called Frostgrave, which I really enjoy. It's a skirmish game of maybe 10 models, and the premise is you're a wizard hiring a bunch of mooks to go into a frozen city and get some money, which is kind of sounds like Mordheim for those of you that are familiar with that. And it's a fun game. It's fun. The tables are played on like a 3x3 table, 3 foot by 3 foot table, and you need a lot of terrain. So for games that need a lot of terrain, 1 2 foot by 2 foot chunk of insulation foam from Home Depot could build a lot. A little bit goes a long way, especially if you use it properly. So I think I'm not going to add any more like smaller boulders on these flatter parts, just so I could have that usefulness for my wargaming needs. But if I wanted to get fancy, I could add more little details, and I could add more. You could always add more.
Yeah, there's almost no such thing as too much, but there's definitely a line that you don't know you've crossed until you're like a mile beyond.
Yep.
So
Very thin line.
yeah, I've filled up the bottle cap over here with my hot glue, and I'm waiting for that to cool off because, like we said before, hot glue plus metal equals hot metal.
Very
And
true.
once that is nice and cool, I'm gonna start gluing the the leaves on. I almost said branches, but I don't think they technically have any branches.
But I do love how, because like you mentioned, these trees repeatedly, and it's really nice to actually see them like being built and how accessible it is.
Oh yeah, it's just made out of things that you probably have around. People probably, everybody definitely should have scouring pads. You know, the green Brillo pads. If you got the blue ones, you just got blue trees. Nothing wrong with that, as long as you're
Yeah,
willing to cut it up and you haven't. And of course, it has to be fresh. We don't want goopy bits that aren't intentional to be a part of our trees. You know,
you and that goop
we don't want goop.
definitely don't
Goop is
enjoy
bad.
the paper straw thing.
That's right.
I can't blame you. It is a lot to work with. Um, Speaking about materials, another thing to remember in making terrain, if for any reason somebody's looking at you funny about like your choice of making terrain for a game, like, oh, why did you make it out of a bottle when you could have bought something? You know, you don't really need that negativity in your life. Like, think about it. We everything could be bought. I could have just as easily gone online, find some cool STL file with 3D print this cool pile of rocks, infinitely more detailed, a whole lot more gorgeous. But where's the fun in that? Like, the cool thing about making terrain is that it's a new thing. It's a new hobby. You learn a lot. I learned how to use a lot of power tools because of this hobby, and I think that is cool. Like, and again, it goes back to how you want to enjoy this hobby, but it's always cool to really like look at what you built and just appreciate, like, hey, I did this. I figured this out on my own. I improvised this. There's a great satisfaction in that. So if you have people giving you sass because you didn't buy $800 worth of D&D tiles or something, like, I don't know. That's just rude.
I've also never had anybody give me sass for this.
That's good.
Um, it's worth noting, like it's pretty rare to find any negativity around it in the first place. Like the snobbery that may exist in a local meta for tabletop games and such, it rarely extends to something like handcrafted terrain because first of all, it's pretty low effort to make something look really convincing, but also like it doesn't matter how convincing it ends up looking. People just like having the terrain so much
Yeah,
that you're not going to run into any pushback. That's for sure.
that's
Now,
true.
where are my scissors? Here we are. I'm going to snip out some branches for this birch boy. Now, because this guy is something like a birch tree. Uh, the way I figure it, it's a tall but skinny sort of tree. So I'm going to snip out a bunch of smaller bits that I'm going to snap onto this model. Well, I'm gonna push the tree through them in varying orders and with random tilts to them, no doubt.
Yeah,
And
with
then
variety.
once they're all on, I'm going to trim it up and make it look nice, hopefully.
How many of these trees do you have like at the ready? Like how
At the
many?
ready.
Like, do you plan on? Are you building a whole forest? You're making like 5 or 6 at a time.
I'm probably gonna end up with a whole forest. This is actually all the trees that I have of these right now.
Oh yeah.
I fear if I were to lie about it, I'd have to produce them. But so this is actually the first time I've made these particular trees. I do have the Citadel plastic trees. I do have, the army painter, ready trees that shed everywhere.
Oh yeah.
But each of those, I feel like they always need to be tougher, and they definitely always need to be cheaper. So short of buying like armatures and working on, it's called like, I think it's called like sea foam or something. It's like some kind of particular plant you're supposed to glue onto them. There's that whole rabbit hole. Instead of going all the way down, I figure, if you just need trees, these trees are more than enough. You also notice, um, I forgot to mention, there is labeling spray painted onto these, looks like. I don't know if you could see it on the camera. Those white letters there.
Yeah, it's coming in clear.
Yeah. If you just point those face down, even if you forget on an occasional piece, no one's going to notice. So that's something I was really wary of when I was picking out what are the right pans for these. But
Another cool thing too, like let's say you're making terrain for you're the DM and you want to make your session really stick out. You'd be like, I mean, even if you missed a couple of, the branding on oh yeah, the word that you just said, I had a brain fart. If you miss some of those Scotch Brite labels, your players are probably just going to be so ecstatic that they're walking into a whole forest instead of like like those paper cutouts that like they probably won't even care. Like, and that's the cool thing about like DMs, and like making terrain for RPGs like that. Your player characters are your players are, always appreciate like that extra oomph that you put into your games. So
Yeah,
like
that
when they
really is.
come in,
Yeah,
what?
that is really it exactly. I do. I run games, but I never use my terrain very often for it. But the rare times that I do actually manage to bring it down, uh, it always adds to the immersion. It never draws away from it. Like to actually have a physical cart there instead of just like like a card that you just laid down face down. Like that's about the footprint of a cart. It adds so much to the game that it's always worth having done, even if it's just something simple like these trees. You just leave them scattered around the board, tell them they're in a forest, and they're gonna
It's
start
done.
really buying it. They're in a forest, you know.
Good old immersion. You can
Yep.
never go wrong.
All
Oh,
right. So
cool.
we're getting to the end of this one here,
Yeah, we're almost at the end.
which is good. I'm getting to the end of this tree. So
I'm still whittling away at this. Like the cool thing about this, like working with foam, is that it takes time, but it's again, it's like channeling your inner Bob Ross. You find your happy place, you get a rhythm, you put on some laid back music, and
and then you
just
talk
keep going.
nonsense about doing miniatures on a live stream 5 years later.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
yeah, that's about right.
about the way
So
to go.
now we have
So
5 minutes. I guess I should start plugging things.
well, we're getting to the end steps here. So if I could just maybe finish the little rant I got for the trees.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I forgot to talk about how rocks aren't gray, but
We
maybe that's for another
next time
time.
we'll do this
Yeah.
again. This has been really fun.
Yeah. Next time, rocks. Gray is not a color.
Rocks gray.
That's right.
News at 11.
So what I'm doing is I'm taking these little squares that I cut out. I'm putting a hole in the middle. Doesn't really matter how well that hole comes out. Just a nice tear. I start it with my X-Acto knife, and then I cut it so it doesn't look quite so square. And then I leave a dollop of hot glue right about where I want it to stop. And without even dry fitting it, because I like to live on the edge.
On the edge. Yeah, I
On
mean,
the edge.
again, that goes back to like improvising. Like you'd be
Yeah.
surprised. Just go with it. Whatever you're building, just go with it.
Improvisation is more of the is the most important skill to have for stuff like this.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah,
you know what? No matter how it comes out, it's great. Like because you keep every time you do it, you learn a lot more.
exactly.
So is that pretty much like the last step? Like glue, try to make a ballpark of the hole, and then you just keep adding stacks.
Yeah, you just keep adding stacks all the way to the end, and then once you get to the end, you just don't cut a hole in one, just like this, and you just glue it on top, and it just is just like a cap. It doesn't
Yeah,
require
that's
much effort
awesome.
at all.
Cool. All right. So
The plugs.
the plugs. Thanks, Andy, for showing the cool birch tutorial. Mine, there's a lot of steps to this. I just want to show you all the basics of foam carving. It's more simple than it's just simple, really. Up next, once all this dries, I'm gonna like add some texture with the foam ball and like start painting it, but that'll be for a different date. Thank you all for watching. We're going to be putting together a YouTube channel soon, probably like literally like the end of the month or 2 weeks, which will be Pineapple Creations. Follow me on Instagram at Pineapple Creator. Here is the card. Whoa, it's backwards because cameras. But you can see a lot of the content that I've been making, like terrain, all the workshops we've been running, resin casting. Like this is a deep rabbit hole. And for those of you that are just learning how to do wargaming, or making terrain for this, it's a great hobby. The community's spectacular. Um, there's a huge wealth of information that's out there now compared to a decade ago, and it's only going to keep growing. So it's a great time to get into this, a great time to learn how to play D&D, all that fun stuff. So
Especially now while we're locked inside.
oh yes, I mean, if you want to learn a new hobby, here we are. Good old quarantine life. You'll have a whole forest built in no time. So we probably have more than like 2 minutes left. I just want to say thanks again. This has been Rob from Pineapple Creations.
Yep.
And
And I'm Andy. And as we draw to the close here, I'd just like to thank you all for coming. Uh, What's up next? Voice in my head. Is there something coming on after us? No, there is something coming on. Yeah, I would love to know.
Yes, please let us know what's coming up next.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Stay tuned for Call of Cthulhu, A Night at Burnwood Manor. Do I have that right? And will
It
that
sounds
be?
exciting.
That should be right wherever it is you found us. Actually, whatever bin that was.
Twitch stream, I think, right? We're on the Twitch stream.
We're on Twitch.
Awesome.
We're on Zoom. We're on YouTube.
We're on all the things. So thank you again, Rich, for helping us, the voice in our heads, and thank you to the Long Island Tabletop Expo for making something happen in the midst of this pandemic. It's really cool that we all got to hang out digitally.
Yep. All right.
Yeah,
Thanks
no
for coming.
problem. So
Play us